All right, welcome everybody to this new session of the Machine Learning Coffee Seminar of the Finnish Center for Artificial Intelligence. And we are very lucky to have with us today Petri Ylikoski, who's Professor of Science and Technology Studies at the Faculty of Social Sciences at the University of Helsinki. And he's also a visiting professor in the Institute for Analytical Sociology at Ylikoski University. And Petri is going to talk about what is data literacy. It's a very timely topic. So thanks, Petri, for being with us, and we're very excited to hear from you.
Thank you. Just small technique. Okay. Let's start fresh. So the title of the talk is data literacy, and what I'm going to do is to present the research project that we have had going on for more than a year about data literacy. And this opening slide basically shows the basic challenge. So we are not so much about developing tools for using data, but thinking about how data is used in organizations and what kind of preconditions it has. So the project we are talking about is has a title, Data Literacy for Responsible Decision Making. And this is funded by the Strategic Research Council for 6 years. And the Strategic Research Council is kind of a special unit within the Academy of Finland that funds this kind of special project of societal importance. So they require a lot of societal impact, interdisciplinary, and so on. And our project is interdisciplinary in the sense that we have people from cognitive science, computer science, law, philosophy, science and technology studies, and sociology involved. What we are trying to do is kind of feed multiple aspects of data together. And most of our studies are case studies related to Finnish health, social and welfare data. So what I'm going to do is to kind of describe how we ended up analyzing this data literacy and what is specific in our approach to data literacy, how it's different from the kind of typical way of thinking about data literacy, and show some reasoning behind that, and then introduce briefly kind of the topics that we are dealing with. And I hope this is useful for conceptualizing how computer scientists and social scientists collaborate, but also kind of useful in giving a broader context for thinking about use of data in society. So the background. So the call that we were answering was called literacy. Longer title was Information Literacy and Evidence-Informed Decision Making. One of the funny things about this call was that the description of the call was quite different in Finnish and English in terms of the concepts. So here you can see that in Finnish it's about knowledge literacy, and in English it's about information literacy. And I'm not picking this up because I want to make fun of the call, but I think it kind of shows kind of a semantic ambiguity with respect to concepts of data, evidence, knowledge, and decision making in this context. And this is the context where we are operating. But anyway, the call was building heavily on the notion of literacy, and that these various literacy concepts have been around for a long time. They are rooted in kind of ordinary literacy and numeracy that you learn in school. The first years, how you learn to read, you learn to do mathematics, and so on. And these notions have been then expanded to various domains. So you can hear about science literacy, media literacy, information literacy, digital literacy, cultural literacy, financial literacy, and so on. I don't know how many different notions there are, but they are basically always referring to core knowledge, set of skills that are needed for dealing with the information and tasks within a certain domain. So, for example, science literacy, which is a concept that has been around like 30 or 40 years at least. It kind of covers what kind of competencies everyday people should have to understand and critically evaluate news about science. So kind of basic understanding of scientific reasoning, evidence, and so on. So specific contents of these literacies are kind of defined quite variously, but the basic idea is that kind of core concepts and skills that everybody should have. It's kind of citizen competencies. So when we started to do this project, we were thinking about first, the notion of literacy wasn't forced on us, but somehow it was appealing in the call. And as a background, our team composition was basically built around people we have networked within FCAI. So this is kind of a output of FCAI in terms of the collaboration. But we didn't want this to be about AI or machine learning. Machine learning is too technical. AI, there's too much hype. And so we were kind of trying to avoid the whole word in a description and having kind of a demystifying approach. And that's why we kind of started to talk about data, machine learning methods, and so on. But also we wanted to highlight the kind of continuity in traditional and machine learning powered uses of data. Because when you start to talk about AI, then there's an expectation is somehow special, and then also with the term AI, you get a lot of kind of misleading assumptions about what the process is about. So somehow people start to think about some kind of a superior intelligence involved in the data analysis rather than finding patterns in the data. Second, we want to treat data as socio-technical phenomenon in a sense that we wanted to have an interdisciplinary approach and treat it as a social phenomenon. So not starting with a distinction like a technical and social dimensions, but treating these as the same thing with the basic idea that any successful use of data in modern society requires that you can handle all the technical, but also the legal, social, ethical, and epistemic aspects of data usage. But also, we wanted to utilize a broader version of data in a sense that we weren't thinking about only kind of digital data. Rather, we wanted to root data to the idea of evidence, in a sense that data is something that can be or should be used as evidence. And we also wanted to include qualitative data, meaning data based on the observations, interviews, and so on. Kind of many social scientists are using, but also some kind of data that is provided by newspapers and so on. So qualitative data could be treated as textual data, but it is different from textual data because the way you deal with it. And behind that, at least for me, but also ideas about what kind of implication this would have for philosophy of science, philosophy of social sciences. So to kind of understand these points, I just picked from the net this picture which presents different sorts of fallacies involved with data. So this is not something that I subscribe, but I think this is a useful illustration. A couple of points. First, underlying our idea behind our thinking about data was that we should think about data in terms of causal processes. Data is material thing and it's affected by causal processes. And if you think about how data is used in science, crucial thing are the causal processes that produce the data. So rather than starting from the kind of a typical place where philosophy of science or statistics starts, where you take the data as a given and then assume that it has some kind of evidential value, we would zoom in the various ways which affect the evidential value of the data. So thinking about, for example, there's I don't know how well you can read it, but you have here survivorship bias and publication biases, which are basically the same, both examples of sampling biases. And then what's behind there? That's a causal process that generates the data you have available. So this is kind of a type of a reasoning that we wanted to capture or add to the discussion. So it's not only about like a kind of a formal statistical inference that you might have with overfitting or danger with summary metrics in this table, but also processes related to the generation of data. But the second thing that's related to our idea of having broader notion of data is that many of these quantitative fallacies described here are also qualitative fallacies. Think about, for example, cherry picking incentives, what is called here Cobra effect, sampling bias towards the mean is basically just the case of using exceptional cases, causal inference fallacies, observer effects like Hawthorne effect, and what they call McNamara fallacy. All these things can be also mistakes and also be made with quality data. And this is important because if you want to develop tools for communicating and understanding how to think about data, we might utilize people's probably better understanding how to deal with qualitative data rather than forcing them on various technical statistical notions as a kind of basic understanding. But anyway, as the caution here says, I'm not advocating this kind of fallacy-based education about thinking about data, but I use this as just evidence. So the basic challenge, as we kind of fixing on the idea of data literacy, was that existing data literacy literature is quite much focused on kind of everyday skills. So here is another illustration I draw from the net. Presents data literacy as a kind of Venn diagram where you have ability to read data, ability to work with the data, and ability to communicate with the data. So what's missing from this picture, if we are thinking about the question setting of this call, was that first, it completely misses all legal and social dimensions of data gathering, management, and usage. So for example, in the previous slide, we have this perverse incentives, which is the case where you have you are using the data, same data, to observe behavior and guide the behavior, and that creates perverse incentives to people. That kind of things don't really fit that kind of a data literacy setting. And same thing with the legal regulation of data use and thinking about privacy and so on. So these are missing. A second important dimension that it's missing is that it's not really dealing with specialist data products that modern organizations and societies are dealing with. This kind of a do-it-yourself data analysis. But if you are thinking about, for example, political decision makers who are using data to make decisions, it's not really feasible to assume that they become super competent do-it-yourself data analysts and able to build sophisticated machine learning models and so on. We need something else than just kind of do-it-yourself basic capability. Many of the books about data literacy, half of them is basically explaining how to use Excel. That's not really the focal point that we should pay attention to. And third issue is how to integrate various sources of evidence. So if you think it from the point of view of decision maker, you have multiple sources of evidence, of different kinds of evidence, and the quality of your decision making really depends on how you integrate these various sources of evidence. Whereas in this diagram, it's basically how you make your case, how you sell your point, how you sell your findings. So this is a very different perspective to think about how to present and communicate data. So this is this kind of what I call comprehensive approach, where the basic idea is that we take all these dimensions. Here I'm kind of listing them as technical, legal, epistemic, social, and ethical. Since about 5, it's not really kind of crucial how you kind of precisely define them. The point is that with respect to all issues related to data in modern day society, you are facing kind of technical things related to how you how the data is represented, managed, and so on. Legal issues with respect to its ownership and rights to use it and so on. Epistemic things that are related kind of things, what you can do with the data, its reliability, what kind of inferences you can make. Social, which refers to kind of social arrangements involved in the data production, general acceptability, expectations about privacy, and so on. And all these are quite often formulated in language of ethics. But anyway, point is that all of these are preconditions for successful of use of data in modern society, and we should treat them together. And that's why we kind of combined in our research project kind of creative kind of mixed teams that had both social scientists or legal scholars and computer scientists within them. The second idea was to kind of cover the whole trajectory of data from production to decision making and looking at what goes in there, because there's when we in all these contexts, we are talking about data, but it's a little bit different meaning in its context. So production is kind of just information. In the end, it's evidence, but it's crucial what happens in between. And as I said, here the emphasis should be on understanding the causal process, what's happening to data. in this process. But this process is goal-directed. So what kind of goals we have with respect to the inference we want to make, that what kind of processing, management, and analysis and presentation we are doing with respect to the data, but also what kind of past choices we have made for the data affects what kind of new uses we can incorporate it. So this is kind of a novelty. We are trying to bring in these various dimensions and kind of focus on this whole process, not from the point of view of do it yourself, but understanding how this is done in a modern organization, in scientific research, and so on. And this leads us to the definition of data literacy that we have been utilizing. So we are basically defined it as understanding of central epistemic, ethical, legal, and technical questions related to data. So this means that data literacy is basically based on the understanding how data becomes evidence, how it can be evaluated, and how the causal process of generation and processing data affects its evidential value. And that's why it's important to understand how data is generated, processed, analyzed, presented, and so on. So, for example, how machine learning models depend on the data and its qualities and inferential goals and so on. And then our hope is that this would lead better decision making, more realistic expectations about the possibilities of data analytics, and sharper critical discourse on future nature of AI. So, and I'm saying hopefully because much of the studies with respect to science literacy show that although many believe that, for example, hesitancy with respect to vaccinations depends on people's lack of knowledge, it's actually the case. It isn't actually the case in a sense that quite often people who are anti-vaccines or hesitant have a relatively high, or at least some measure of science literacy. So they are able to read, they are reading scientific literature using concepts and so on, and actually their increased ability in science literacy makes them more convinced of their own reasoning. So there's something going wrong, but it's not just missing the basic concept of science or scientific process or peer review process and so on. It's more like they have kind of a wrong causal model of, for example, for the production of medical knowledge. So they are quite often understand how the review process works and so on, but then they have substantial theories about various systematic biases within that process, rather than just having lacking understanding of those. But anyway, that's a side issue. But anyway, the point is that the hope is that when people and organizations have better data literacy, they are better in using the data rather than just being able to pick up holes in any argumentation and be more skillful in defending on their idiosyncratic views and shooting down opposing views. We can back to this in the discussion. But then the second important thing is that who we are focusing. So whereas the basic data literacy, mainstream concept of data literacy is towards basic citizen competencies. And of course, nothing what we are saying here is against that idea. That's a hugely important thing. But our project started with kind of a observation that that's not enough. We also need data literacy and understanding creates for people who are using data in organizations like civil servants, policy makers, but also decision makers in both private and in public sector, but also in scientific research. So if we assume that experts don't need any kind of a special skills, they know what the data is about, they know what the methods are about, but everyone is specialist only in very narrow area. And then outside that area, we need certain kind of a data literacy. And interesting question is, what kind of a data literacy needs do these users of data, decision makers, and scientific researchers have? And second, for experts, they also need, I think, these tools, for example, for communicating with non-experts. So think about, for example, the pandemic, which I think was a kind of selling point for this project. So we made the kind of initial plan of India. We wrote that before the pandemic became a big thing. I think the deadline was in January 2020. And then the deadline for the application was in June. So the whole pandemic got on while we were writing the longer application. We didn't make that many explicit references to pandemic, but I think the observations about pandemic, think about how to assess credibility of various epidemiological models or economic models of consequences of pandemic, how to handle uncertainty, how to think with these epidemiological models, how to discuss biases and limitations of these models and so on. These were kind of apparent. This is a chance for everyone communicating about these things. And it's apparent that even specialists are not very skillful in discussing these issues. So there's a lot of room for improvement here. But then, and this third point wasn't really in the plan, but it kind of came apparent that once we started the project, that we should also start considering data literacy as an attribute of organizations, not in the sense that how data literate their employees are, but in terms of the organization, how it works. So how well does the organization understand and utilize data? It's available, data it's self-creating, or the data it can create, and so on. And how well it's integrated with the decision making. So this is kind of a future extension of this data literacy concept, in a sense that I think it makes sense to treat organizations as agents in a sense that they should have basic competencies in dealing with data that is related to their activities and environment. So this led to the project, and now I basically give you a brief description of the various work packages that we created, and kind of show kind of background philosophy forming them. So there's a lot of things happening in these work packages. So I have basically highlighted the stuff that is related to data literacy. And the project have basically 5 work packages. The first one is about basically about building machine learning models based on social and health data. And Pekka Martin is running that. But on top of that kind of basic model building activity, we have this second layer of reflection where social scientists are involved, which is the kind of observing how Pekka is building these models and how these models are received by their users and other audiences. We hope that doing this kind of case study helps us to kind of create, illustrate understanding of how data quality, subject matter expertise, and so on matters to machine learning models. And how, for example, the characteristics of data, kind of data you have, and inferential goals, meaning whether you are predicting or looking for some kind of a causally useful information and so on, affect the machine learning model building process. So this is kind of our basic design for these work packages. So we have kind of an underlying project developing something, and then we have social scientists observing and collaborating with the process. The second work package is related to the differential privacy, which is quite a timely topic nowadays, and Antti Honkkila is running that. And then basically, again, we have the same structure. Antti and his associates are developing the tools for differential privacy, but then they are also sharing the issue of what is the meaning of privacy, what are the goals of differential privacy, and so on, with social scientists and legal scholars. So this creates a kind of natural area where to collaborate. And of course, differential privacy is kind of interesting topic for us in a sense that first, differential privacy is becoming an issue that people should have data about. So how to communicate, how differential privacy works, but also although differential privacy is a kind of technological means of solving a social problem of trust, how we can trust the people who are managing the data, that it doesn't get in the wrong hand, or that people can make inferences from the data that people find that is against their privacy interests. But on the other hand, it still requires trust in organizations and people who are designing differential privacy software and who are implementing it and so on. So it's interesting in many ways from the social science point of view. The third work package is run by Marju Chalokannel. Her background is in the law. So here, there the kind of a main task is to kind of create kind of overview of various legal and ethical requirements of data use and governance. And of course, this is a highly timely issue in a sense that there's a lot of new legislation coming from European Union in multiple packages, but also you have national practices and legislation. And it seems quite a lot of there's a lot of confusion about these issues, and many of the, let's say, medical researchers are still quite badly misunderstanding how the legal requirements work and what's the kind of underlying rationale there. But also this includes kind of a more theoretical or philosophical topic of creating some kind of a conceptual clarity with respect to concepts like privacy, consent, discrimination, and transparency that are constantly utilized in context of uses of big data and automated decision making and so on. Then we have fourth package run by Giulio Iacuzzi, and this is about data presentation and visualization, how it links to decision making. So Giulio is developing tools for interactive data visualization, which I think is a very important element of making data understandable and helping people to kind of get a feeling of the data, and that I think would facilitate the inferences. But this also connects to kind of cognitive science question setting about how the way data is presented and kind of underlying abilities of the people receiving the information, how that affects decision making. So here we are trying to reach not only computer science and cognitive science, but connect that to the issues also in philosophy, argumentation, and so on. And finally, we have last work package run by Maria Alestalo, who's sociologist, and she's basically doing case studies on how public sector organizations are employing data. Meaning, she's looking at these new health and social welfare organizations, how they are using data. And what she's especially looking at is data work, which is a concept that refers to ways in which kind of requirements for the organization of producing usable data. So what kind of activities it needed, for example, in a hospital, so that it actually produces useful data about the diseases and the functioning of the organization. It's not data specialists who are producing, is basically redistributing and utilizing the workforce, nurses, caring people, doctors, and so on. And it's highly important and quite often misregarded, missed element of use of data. Somehow people assume that data is somehow free floating and available, but actually requires a lot of work, and it might create all kinds of conflicts within the organization. And finally, kind of motivational thing is that much of the fears about using data in social sphere is related to kind of profiling. So we were creating profiles for certain kinds of people, and then that would kind of increase the discrimination rather than help fighting against that, and also would break against people's privacy. But what we are looking for ways of using data that is not based on predicting individual outcomes, but analyzing how social processes work and the kind of social mechanisms in the world. And I think this is especially interesting because if you think about the differential privacy, that basically blocks the predictive modeling with respect to individuals, but it might still make possible various uses of data that might still be useful or even more useful for improving, let's say, social services or health services. But I think I have now basically use my time. So I thank you for your patience and open questions for the floor for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Petri. Yeah, very interesting overview. So do we have any questions from, yes, I see that Sami has a question.
Hi, Petri, thanks. Excellent talk.
Hello.
I'm going to continue on something that we started discussing earlier, but try to open it up so to the audience as well, is that could we now, to the extent you now have a model of how an organization uses data for decision making, for instance, so seeing it as some kind of, at least simply as an organigram on who makes decisions and who prepares them and so on. So to the extent we have a model for this, we could also use the same model in an AI assistant, which is trying to recommend where in organization to use what kind of data for whatever decision they need to make, which would be a really interesting research question. Does this would be an extension of the AI assistants we have so far been thinking of, where the counterpart is an individual, and we need to have simplified models of the cognitive structure of people. But in this case, this would have nice new properties, and I never thought of this before. Do you think this would make sense? And of course, this would need to be applied in some really simplified cases. Obviously, I don't think that we can have a detailed enough structure model of a complicated organization involving complicated people, but in simplified cases this could be useful. So it's a variant of a recommendation engine, if you will.
Yes, I can see point there, but kind of two problems. First, we don't actually have that kind of models. So many organizations have kind of flowcharts and representations how they think the information is processed. But actually that's quite often quite far from how organization actually manages the data and how the information flows with it. So we have very little understanding of that. So we need kind of studies that have this kind of organizational focus, and I think it's a shortcoming in social studies of data, whatever, and organizations, that this is not paid enough attention. And second thing, it might be a problem is that organizations are quite often quite idiosyncratic in the sense that how these things work. So it might be that you can recognize general patterns how things work, but then each organization is its own individual with respect what is the idiosyncratic combination of these different elements. But I agree that if we would have kind of a even the simplified model, how this works, it would be very useful for thinking about how the use of information and data in the organization could be improved, and so on. So yeah, that's in direction, but I think we don't yet have the crucial element.
Yeah, if I can still follow up, but then we probably should continue offline and give the floor to the others. Is that to the extent that the model does not exist, this becomes interesting to machine learners, right? Because if it would be possible to observe how that really works, then we would be able to learn the rest from the data, and simply the things that we don't know, we would put at latent variables, parameters that we estimate from the data as we go. And this would be a really interesting machine learning problem. Otherwise, it would be just about modeling organizational structure, which would be some kind of model-driven decision-making or organizational management or something. But so that would be the opportunity, I think. But yeah, and regarding that things are idiosyncratic, I think we would need to identify a simplified case. So if it would be kind of all the strategic decision making in an organization, no, of course we can't do anything, it's too complicated. But a simple process such as recruitment, for instance, a team of recruiters who have different expertise, and then the data needs to be, the candidate needs to be given to the right person. And now if we take into account what will happen after they give a recommendation, we would be able to take that into account when deciding who to give it. These kinds of simplified cases, I think we would be able to formulate. If we can find something where it would be really important and useful, a special case, so that we would then build the models for that special case, and then claim that, of course, in principle, it can be generalized if we just have a model. But yeah, so yeah, sorry, I need to give the floor to others. But
yes, but just comment. Yes, I think it would work if you choose kind of a relatively well-defined and routine decision-making task, like recruitment, in a sense that at least with the big organizations like University of Helsinki, Aalto University, there has been systematic to streamline that, so and make it less idiosyncratic, and it's a relatively well-defined decision-making situation. We have well-defined outcome, and focusing on those. But then you're thinking about like decision-making in pandemic. That's kind of a completely different ball game, because you don't really know what is the problem. Well, decision makers don't really know what is the what is happening, and what is the context, and what is actually the goal, and yeah. But we can continue that in later occasions.
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Very interesting discussion. Is there any other question from the public? Otherwise, yeah. So I was wondering. I mean, this is a fantastic, very interdisciplinary, touching on very different topics and different expertise. And yeah, one thing they say, I'm not sure I caught. So all these groups essentially, they're working on various different topics. And how do you? So is there a plan to say to reach your target of, let's say, non-experts? So how would you disseminate then the products of these? Say of all this different work, what's the next step besides say publishing and having conferences, etc. So how do you reach the non-expert audience, for example, or
Yeah, that's one of the challenges. But I think think about, for example, policymakers. I think we could develop some kind of courses or materials for let's say. Civil servants working at the ministries. So that's a relatively focused group and well-defined group that can be accessed with relatively small scale educational approaches, but that would have a huge impact if that would improve their ability to use data models and so on. But how to do that? Because it's probably not a good idea just produce some kind of teaching materials and then they can do it. So it requires some kind of engagement, and of course this is kind of skills that require constant updating. But and of course it also requires motivation. And so this is something we are trying to develop. So we have this idea of a kind of a roadshow that we are hoping to take these audiences. Of course, you can give kind of full package of data literacy. You can focus on something. For example, you can give a kind of to tell them what is differential privacy, and then kind of its implication and so on. So you have to do it by pieces. But that's what we are developing, and that's why we have had quite good experience, kind of a positive experience of people being receptive. So I had a couple of meetings with the cabinet office where we had people from different ministries, and they have been highly kind of interested in this kind of stuff and kind of are waiting for how to build up. So this, but of course, this is kind of basic tension in this kind of strategic research council research projects. So on the other hand, you are expected to do this kind of a societal engagement and influencing, but then you should do that as kind of a side project to whatever else you are doing. But anyway, that's something that we are trying to do, and once we have experiences, hope to also share those experiences, because I think this is kind of the whole issue of data literacy is much bigger than one research project, and we are just sampling some issues. But I think it would be important to have this theme as a topic, and I think it's also kind of frame that we should use when we are thinking about use of research in decision making, and use of evidence-based policies and so on. So I hope that this presentation triggered something in your imaginations how to think about these issues.
Yes, definitely. It's very interesting. Okay. Anything else? Let's see. All right. Then I think unless there is any other comment, we are done on time. We managed. Thanks for being very timely, perfect, and very clear. And yeah, super into the topic and very, very important. So we thank again for coming here. And I think we'll see you all next week for the next Machine Learning Coffee Seminar. And have a great week. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Have a nice week.
Thanks again. Bye.